Hello and welcome to another edition of Ask the Consistory, a video podcast produced by the Confessional Orthodox Evangelical Lutheran Communion. I'm your host for this video, Reverend Jake Zabel of the St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church located in Dalby, Queensland, Australia. So the last video I posted on Ask the Consistory was a video where I answered the question, where did the Magi come from? Now, the issue with that video is that I did record that video back in December. I wrote my script and recorded the video back in December and only posted it up for Epiphany. Now for Epiphany, I preached a sermon on Matthew chapter 2 verses 1 through to 12. And so as part of my research for my sermon, I actually came upon a lot more information regarding where the Magi came from that I didn't include in my previous video. So today I'm just going to do a part 2 of where did the Magi come from, and in order to do that I'm just going to read to you an excerpt from my sermon from Epiphany. So let's begin. So who were the Magi, and how did they know about the Messiah? Magi were magicians. This is where we get our English word magic. The word originated in Babylon. In Jeremiah chapter 39 verse 3, one of the Babylonian officials is called the Rabmag, the chief magi, the word Rab being a Babylonian word for chief. The word magi was used by the Babylonians to refer to magicians, astrologers, scholars, etc. The word later appears in the Greek language also. In the Greek Old Testament, the word magi is used as a replacement for the Hebrew word chatum, which literally means engravers. But this word is used throughout the Old Testament to refer to magicians and sorcerers. The only place that the word magi appears in the Hebrew Old Testament is in Jeremiah 39 in reference to the Rabmag. But the word magi appears in the Greek Old Testament to refer to magicians. The Greek Old Testament uses the word magi to refer to the Egyptian magicians in both Genesis and Exodus, and also the Babylonian magicians in Daniel. But even though the Magi were often wielders of dark magic, this is not always the case, since Daniel himself was considered a Magi. In fact, Daniel 4:9 and Daniel 5:11 called Daniel the chief of the magicians. He was the Rabmag. Thus it is possible to be a God-pleasing Magi. Essentially, the Magi were alchemists and astronomers. Paul Kreutzmann wrote in his popular commentary on the Gospel of Matthew, Magi he calls them, not kings, as the medieval legend has it, but the scientists of those days who at many a court formed the king's privy council. They cultivated chiefly medicine, natural science, especially in its occult applications, the interpretation of dreams, astronomy, and astrology. And Martin Luther said concerning the Magi, Magi, or wise men, were not kings, but learned and expert people in natural science. The Magi were nothing else than what the philosophers were in Greece and the priests in Egypt, and such as are with us the learned men of the universities. But where did the Magi who saw Jesus come from? Many would instantly say Babylon or Persia, since Magi is originally a Babylonian word. However, even though the word does originate from this region, it does not mean that the Magi who saw Jesus came from there. Matthew calls them Magi, and as I stated above, the Greek Old Testament uses this word to refer to magicians both in Egypt and in Babylonia. Additionally, the Acts of the Apostles uses the word Magi to refer to Simon the magician in Acts 8 and Elymas the magician in Acts 13. The former lived in Samaria and the latter in Paphos on Cyprus. So by the time of Jesus' birth, the word Magi was used for all magicians, whether they be from Egypt, Babylonia, Samaria, or Greeks. One church tradition believes that the Magi came from the kingdom Sheba, located near modern-day Yemen. Martin Luther himself held to this belief, stating that the Magi came from Arabia Felix, the term used for the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula. This belief is based on two texts, Isaiah chapter 60 verse 6, which says that a multitude of camels shall come from Midian and Ephah, and all those from Sheba shall come, and they shall bring gold and frankincense and good news and the praises of the Lord. And also Psalm 72:10, which says the kings of Sheba and Seba bring gifts. The church tradition believes that the Magi were kings or wise men from Sheba who brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh, mirroring the gifts of the Queen of Sheba who gave these same gifts to Solomon. 1 Kings 10:10 says that she brought Solomon gold and spices and precious stones. And 1 Kings 10:25 says that all who brought Solomon gifts brought him silver, gold, myrrh, spices, garments, horses, and mules. This view also holds that the kingdom of Sheba is descended from Sheba, the grandson of Abraham via his wife Keturah, and that the Magi knew about the Messiah via this connection. See Genesis 25 concerning Abraham and his wife Keturah. When pondering this theory, there are a number of questions to consider though. First, some will say, isn't Sheba in Ethiopia and not Yemen? And this is a common location for the kingdom of Sheba. The Jewish historian Josephus, in his Antiquities of the Jews, Book 8, Chapter 6, lines 2 and 5, refers to the Queen of Sheba as the Queen of Ethiopia. Jesus also calls her the Queen of the South. See Matthew 12:42 and Luke 11:31. Whereas the Magi came from the east. In response to this, one could say that some locate the kingdom of Sheba in modern-day Yemen, which is both south and east of Jerusalem. Additionally, Genesis 25 verse 6 says concerning the sons of Abraham and Keturah that Abraham sent them away from Isaac eastward into the eastern country. The other issue would be that Psalm 72:10 calls the wise men kings of Sheba, and yet Matthew calls them Magi, not kings. And as mentioned above, many scholars, including Luther, reject the tradition that the Magi were kings. There is a response to this as well, and it is in the fact that there are two Shebas. The reason why Josephus locates Sheba in Ethiopia is because Genesis 10:7 states that Sheba is the son of Ramah, the son of Cush. Sheba is Cush's grandson, and Cush is the ancient name for Ethiopia. It is possible that there may have been two kingdoms of Sheba, one in Ethiopia and one in Yemen. Since Jesus calls the Queen of Sheba the Queen of the South, most likely she came from Ethiopia, south of Israel, and not from Yemen. Psalm 72:10 also refers to the kings of Sheba and Seba. In Genesis 10:7, Seba is the son of Cush and thus the uncle of Sheba. By referring to the pair of Seba and Sheba, Psalm 72 is most likely referring to the Sheba in Ethiopia. Psalm 72 is also a psalm of Solomon, and so the line in verse 10 may not be speaking of the Messiah, but just being a reference to King Solomon himself. Psalm 72:10 also mentions the kings of Tarshish, and 1 Kings 10:22 refers to gifts coming to Solomon on ships of Tarshish. On the other hand, Isaiah 60 verse 6 refers to Sheba, Midian, and Ephah. Midian was another son of Keturah and thus Sheba's uncle, and Ephah was Midian's son, thus Sheba's cousin. By referring to these three together means that this is a reference to the Sheba in Yemen. Also, Isaiah 60, unlike Psalm 72, is a direct prophecy concerning the Messiah. Isaiah chapter 60 verse 1 speaks of the light coming, which was fulfilled by the birth of Jesus, the light who had come into the world. See John 1:9. And Isaiah 66 does mention those from Midian, Ephah, and Sheba bringing gifts of gold and frankincense. So it is possible that the Magi could have been descendants of Abraham and Keturah who traveled from Yemen. If this is the case, then they would have known about the Messiah via their ancestor Abraham. And if the Queen of Sheba had also come from this same kingdom, then the Magi could have learnt about the Messiah via her interactions with King Solomon. However, as I mentioned above, there is most likely two Shebas, and the Queen of Sheba most likely came from Ethiopia and not Yemen. The other tradition is that the Magi came from the Babylonian or Persian region, which at the time of the birth of Jesus was part of the Parthian Empire. If this were the case, then the Magi could have learnt about the Messiah and the Old Testament prophecies from a range of different sources. They could have learnt it from Daniel, who was not only a Magi, but was the Rab-Mag, and this is the most likely source of where they learnt the Old Testament prophecies, but they could have also learnt them from other Jews who lived in Babylonia during the Babylonian captivity, or they could have even learnt it during the reign of Queen Esther, since many Persians converted to Judaism, as it says in Esther chapter 8 verse 17. So that ends the excerpt from my sermon regarding where the Magi came from. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you'd like to have any of your questions answered by the consistory, you can email us at coelc-atc@hotmail. That's coelc-atc@hotmail.com. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've been your host, Reverend Jake Zabel. Goodbye, and God bless.